The first time folks noticed her, the wind was howling down the tracks like it had something to prove, kicking up dust across the wooden planks of the little station in Red Hollow, and rattling the loose tin on the roof. She stood there same as always, spine straight, gloved hands folded tight around a small bundle of wildflowers, eyes fixed on the bend in the rails where the noon train from Abilene would come shrieking through like a steel serpent. She did not blink when the whistle cried out, did not step back when the engine roared past in a storm of smoke and cinders. She only searched every window, every doorway, every shadow for one face, one pair of shoulders she knew better than her own reflection. And when the last car clattered by and no one stepped down for her, she did not weep, not where anyone could see. She simply nodded once, as if the train had whispered a secret meant for her alone, and turned back toward town, boot steady against the boards. Dress hem brushing the dust like a prayer not yet answered. Her name was Clara Mae Whitaker, widow of a ranch hand who had ridden out one winter and never come back, though that was not the man she waited for. No, the man she waited for had left on that very same train 3 years earlier, headed east with a promise tucked into his vest pocket and a silver ring hidden in his saddlebag. He had leaned down from the train steps, tipped his hat low over laughing eyes, and told her plain as daylight, "Every Sunday at noon, you wait for me, and one of those Sundays, I'll step off that train and make you my wife." Folks in Red Hollow had chuckled at that, said men chasing railroad work and far-off wages were like tumbleweeds, always blown somewhere else. But Clara Mae had not laughed. She had stood tall in her pale blue dress and said, "I'll be here," like she was staking land with nothing but faith and stubborn grit. Red Hollow was the kind of town that kept count of other people's business the way bankers counted coins. The saloon doors on Main Street never stayed shut long, and every Sunday after church, boots scraped across the station boards as townsfolk lingered under pretense of meeting freight deliveries, just to see if Clara Mae would come again. And she always did, rain or shine, dust storm or blistering heat. She wore the same hat with a narrow brim, pinned with a faded ribbon he once said matched her eyes. She carried fresh flowers in spring and dried sage in winter, as if marking the seasons for him in case he had forgotten how time passed back home. Some called her foolish, some called her loyal, and some, like old Sheriff Brody, just shook their heads and muttered that hope was a powerful thing, stronger than whiskey, and twice as dangerous. What they did not know, what Clara Mae kept folded deep inside her like a letter never shown, was that she had received one single telegram the first year he was gone. It came stamped from Dodge City, signed with his name, Caleb Turner. 3 words that burned brighter than any prairie fire. Working, coming soon, that was all. No date, no promise, but the echo of his voice in her mind. Folks said telegram boys made mistakes, said railmen drifted, said promises made under steam and longing were thin as paper. But Clara Mae had pressed that yellow slip to her heart and whispered, "Soon means Sunday," and from that day forward, every Sunday belonged to the rails. By the second year, the whispers grew teeth. Women at the mercantile would pause mid-sentence when she stepped in for flour. Men at the bar would tip their hats a shade too slow, pity heavy in their eyes. There was talk that Caleb Turner had struck gold in Colorado and married rich, talk that he had been shot in some saloon brawl out west, talk that he had simply forgotten the girl with dust on her boots and too much faith in her smile. Clara Mae heard it all, because wind carries words whether you invite them or not, but she never rose to the bait, never let her chin tremble. She would pay for her goods, tuck her change into her reticule, and say, gentle as a lullaby, "He'll be home Sunday," as if stating the hour of sunset. There were suitors, too, because a woman with land left from her late husband and eyes like summer sky did not stay unnoticed long. Tom Wilkes from the feed store brought her peach preserves one August afternoon, stood awkward on her porch, and spoke of steady living and shared winters. She thanked him kindly and said her heart was spoken for. Though the man who held it was miles away, Tom left with shoulders slumped, and the town gained another story to chew on. Yet Clara Mae never wavered. Each Saturday night, she would press her dress, polish her boots, and lay the flowers out by the window, as if preparing for church. Only this was her cathedral, the narrow platform by the tracks, and her hymn was the whistle of the approaching train. Sheriff Brody tried once to reason with her. He found her at the station one Sunday after the train had gone, smoke still hanging low over the rails like a ghost, unwilling to depart. "Clara Mae," he said, voice softer than most men dared use, "railroads are long roads, and men change on them. She looked at him steady, eyes bright but dry. "Then he'll step off changed," she replied. "But he'll step off." There was something in her tone that stopped the sheriff cold. Not stubbornness exactly, but certainty. The kind born from nights spent staring at stars and speaking promises into the dark. Brody tipped his hat and left her to it, because even a lawman knows better than to wrestle a woman's hope. And so the third year came, harsh and lean, cattle thin from drought, tempers shorter than usual. The railroad brought strangers more often now, drifters and prospectors, faces no one in Red Hollow recognized. Each Sunday Clara Mae searched them all, heart leaping at every tall silhouette, every familiar tilt of a hat, only to settle back into that quiet ache when the crowd thinned and she stood alone once more. Still, she remained until the conductor called all aboard, and the train pulled away in a shriek of iron and smoke, leaving her framed against the endless stretch of prairie, small but unbroken. Folks began to wonder if perhaps she was waiting not just for a man, but for proof that promises could outrun time and distance. And though none would say it aloud, every soul in Red Hollow felt it deep down. One day that train would come in different. One day the steam would clear and someone would step down onto those boards, and the waiting would finally end. The Sunday it happened began like any other, with wind sweeping low across the prairie and the church bell in Red Hollow ringing out its lonesome call. Clara Mae Whitaker stood before her small mirror and pinned that same faded ribbon to her hat, fingers steady though her heart carried a strange weight she could not rightly name. Outside her window the sky hung heavy with gray clouds, the kind that pressed down on a town and made even the boldest men quieter than usual. She gathered her flowers, winter sage wrapped in twine, and stepped onto the dirt road toward the station, boots tapping a rhythm she had walked near 150 times before. Yet something in the air felt different, like the prairie itself was holding its breath. The noon train was late, a thing so rare it stirred murmurs before the whistle even sounded. Folks gathered on the platform with more purpose than curiosity. Sheriff Brody leaned against a post, arms folded, eyes narrowed toward the bend in the rails. The conductor's assistant had ridden ahead that morning to warn of delays from a rock slide up near the canyon pass, and the delays stretched long enough to twist Clara Mae's insides into knots. Still she stood tall, sage bundle pressed against her chest, gaze fixed forward as if sheer will might pull the engine faster down the line. The wind lifted her skirt hem and tugged at her hat ribbon, but she did not move, not an inch. When the whistle finally split the air, sharp and echoing against the low hills, every head on that platform turned as one. Steam billowed thick as a summer storm, wheels screeching metal against metal, and the train rolled in slower than usual, groaning like an old beast, weary from the climb. Clara Mae's breath caught hard in her throat, because this time the train did not rush past in indifference. It crept, almost hesitant, as if aware of the weight it carried. Doors clanged open one by one, boots hit the platform. Strangers stepped down with carpetbags and tired eyes. A mother with 2 children, a miner missing half his beard, a traveling preacher clutching his Bible. Clara Mae searched each face, pulse hammering louder than the engine itself. Then she saw him, not at first by his face, but by the way he stood, tall and slightly favoring his left leg, hat pulled low, shoulders broader than she remembered. He paused in the doorway of the third passenger car, gripping the rail like a man unsure if the ground below would hold him. The years had carved lines into his jaw and left a thin scar running from temple to cheek, but she would have known that silhouette in the darkest canyon. Caleb Turner, flesh and bone and breathing air, standing exactly where he had promised he would. Her fingers loosened around the sage, and it fell unnoticed to the boards at her feet. Caleb stepped down slow, boots striking wood with a hollow thud that seemed to echo across the entire town. For a long moment he did not look up, as if bracing himself against the possibility that she might not be there. That 3 years was too long for any promise to survive. But when he raised his eyes and found her standing exactly where memory had placed her, pale blue dress whipping in the wind, something inside him broke open. His mouth parted like he meant to speak, yet no words came, because sometimes the distance between 2 souls cannot be crossed by language. Alone, the crowd fell into a silence so deep it swallowed even the hiss of steam. Clara Mae took 1 step forward, then another, boots slow but certain, until only a few feet of worn planks lay between them. "You're late," she said softly, voice trembling at last after 3 years of iron control. Caleb's lips twitched into the faintest smile, weary and humbled all at once. Had to make sure I was worth stepping off that train, he answered, voice roughened by miles and hardship. Sheriff Brody cleared his throat somewhere behind them, but no one dared interrupt the moment, unfolding like sunrise after endless night. Up close, she saw the changes clearer. The scar along his face, the stiffness in his stance, the shadow behind his eyes that had not been there before. "You're hurt," she whispered, reaching out without thinking, fingers brushing the edge of his sleeve. Caleb nodded once. "Rail yard accident in Kansas City. Thought I might not walk right again." He glanced down at his leg, and then back at her. "Took longer than I planned. Clara Mae." His voice carried regret, thick as mud after rain, but beneath it burned something steady, something unbroken. The same promise that had carried him across states and scars. "I waited," she said simply, not as accusation but as truth. Caleb's gaze flickered over her face, like a man memorizing home after wandering too long. "I know," he replied, and from his coat pocket he drew something wrapped in cloth. Hands rough but careful as he unfolded it. Inside lay a silver ring, dulled by time yet shining, stubborn against the light. "Bought it before I left," he said. "Figured I'd come back quick. Never thought the world would test me first." The wind stirred again, carrying the scent of coal and sage, and in that suspended moment between past and future, every soul in Red Hollow understood they were witnessing the end of waiting and the beginning of something harder, because stepping off the train was only the first part of keeping a promise. The platform did not erupt in cheers the way stories sometimes claim towns do. Instead, Red Hollow stood quiet and reverent, like a congregation witnessing something sacred unfold. Caleb Turner held that silver ring in his calloused palm, eyes never leaving Clara Mae Whitaker's face, as if afraid she might vanish like morning mist if he blinked too long. The wind tugged at his coat and rattled the loose station sign overhead, but neither of them seemed to feel it. "Clara Mae," he said, voice low and steady now. "I stepped off that train because there ain't a mile of track long enough to keep me from you." She let out a breath she had been holding for 3 years, a breath that carried dust, doubt, and stubborn hope. All at once he slid the ring onto her finger right there on the weathered boards. No preacher, no church bell, only witnesses in work boots and sun hats. The silver caught the pale light and shone like it had been waiting to. Clara Mae looked down at it and then back up at him, tears finally breaking free and tracing clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. Sheriff Brody cleared his throat loud enough to break the spell. "Well," he muttered, "reckon Sunday just found its answer." A ripple of relieved laughter moved through the gathered townsfolk, and somewhere behind them the conductor called for final boarding. But neither Clara nor Caleb paid it any mind, because this train had already delivered what mattered. They walked off that platform side by side, not rushed, not dramatic, just steady as two people who understood the weight of choosing each other. Caleb's limp was slight but visible, and more than one pair of eyes followed it with quiet concern. Clara noticed too. Of course she did, but she did not slow her pace or offer pity. Instead, she matched him step for step, their strides finding a rhythm as natural as breathing. 3 years, she said softly as they reached the edge of town. "Felt like 30-some nights." Caleb nodded, jaw tight. "Every night I laid awake in some boarding house or bunk car. I pictured this road," he answered, glancing around at the familiar storefronts. "Kept me walking when my leg wanted to quit." Inside her small ranch house, little more than whitewashed boards and stubborn fences. Caleb paused just past the doorway like a man crossing into holy ground. The table was the same, the rocking chair by the hearth unchanged. Even the faded quilt draped across the sofa looked as it had the day he left. Clara set the sage bundle down by the window and turned toward him. "Home don't look different," he said quietly. "No," she replied, "just waited." The simplicity of that truth settled over them, heavier than any speech could have. Because waiting is not the same as standing still. She had worked the land, paid the taxes, weathered drought and gossip, and still carved space in her life for his return. That evening, the town gathered at the little church on Main Street, word spreading faster than wildfire that the waiting had ended. Reverend Collins offered to marry them proper the following Sunday, but Caleb shook his head with a faint smile. "Reckon we've already done our waiting," he said. And so, under lantern light and a ceiling stained by years of smoke, they spoke their vows with dust still clinging to their boots. Clara's voice rang clear, no tremble now, only strength earned the hard way. Caleb's voice cracked once when he promised to stay, not just in body but in spirit. and every person present knew those words carried the weight of miles traveled and battles fought unseen. Married life did not smooth itself out like a fresh sheet. Caleb's leg ached fierce when storms rolled in, and some nights he woke restless, eyes distant, as if still staring down a stretch of track that would not end. Clara would sit beside him in the dark, hand resting over his heart until his breathing steadied. She never asked him to be the man he was before the scar, never demanded he erase the years that had shaped him. Instead, she learned the rhythm of his silences and the way his jaw tightened before rain, and he learned the strength beneath her gentleness, the quiet steel that had stood on that platform 150 Sundays without faltering. Red Hollow changed too. Though it would not admit it outright, the gossip softened into admiration, the whispers replaced by nods of respect when Clara passed with Caleb at her side. Young girls who once giggled behind gloved hands now watched her with thoughtful eyes, as if memorizing the shape of steadfast love. Even Tom Wilkes from the feed store tipped his hat, genuine and warm, because some stories demand surrender from those who once doubted them. The station platform remained the same weathered wood and rattling tin, but it no longer carried the ache of unfinished promises. It carried memory instead. On the first Sunday after their wedding, Clara rose early out of habit, pressing her dress and setting flowers by the window before she caught herself and smiled. Caleb found her standing on the porch, staring toward the tracks in the distance. "Train comes at noon," he said gently. She nodded, then took his hand and laced her fingers through his. "Let it," she replied. They stood together as the whistle sounded far off across the prairie, steam rising like it always had, only now there was no searching in her gaze, no hollow ache waiting to be filled. The train rolled in and out of Red Hollow just the same as any other Sunday. But for the first time in 3 long years, Clara Mae Whitaker did not stand alone on that platform, because the man she had waited for had finally stepped off that train, and this time he was staying.